Hey, everybody. Thank you again for tuning in to Victims to Victors, where we tell our testimony, our trials, our tribulations, but how we also overcame. Sir, thank you so much for coming in. Today we got Adam North Peigan. Am I saying it right?
North Peigan.
Beautiful. Sorry about that. We got, he has an amazing testimony. He sent me some videos and some information, and wow, we're taught a lot about, our general history in school, but not really the details, the nitty gritty, the bad stuff that we don't really want to talk about. And today we're going to shine a little bit of light from a gentleman's testimony that what he personally went through, not a story, not a book, not a documentary he watched, but something that he actually had to endure. And hey, sir, welcome to the program. How are you doing?
Oh, a little bit stressed out with technology, but going to try and get grounded and do what I need to do.
Hey, man, technology is, good for some things, and then other things, little trying,
Mm-hmm. But you can see and hear me pretty good?
I see you. I hear you loud and clear, sir.
Okay, good. All right.
Let's just start off on where are you from, brother?
I'm indigenous, so I'm First Nation, and I come from the Piikani First Nation in southern Alberta, and I'm from the Blackfoot Confederacy. So it's along Highway 3. My community is along Highway 3, going west between Fort McLeod and Pincher Creek. So that's where I come from, but I live in Edmonton, though.
Live in Edmonton. Wow. How's the weather out there now?
It's actually not too bad. It's a little bit cloudy, and not too much snow. They're calling for a lot of snow in southern Alberta today, but up here it hasn't. It's actually quite humid, and it's been nice, but I don't know how long that's going to last for.
Yeah, man. Yeah. I hear you guys get it pretty hard out there, man. Like here in Ontario, we get it, but I'm hearing stories that it's pretty terrible out there.
Yeah, when we're in the heat of winter, we have to survive in like around minus 40 with lots of snow, and because Edmonton is quite north, it's the most northerly city in on the continent, eh? So it gets
really?
pretty cold and lots of snow.
Wow.
Yeah.
I'm not a fan of that cold stuff, man.
Yeah. You gotta have thick skin to live out here.
But it's a beautiful place, but man, I can't.
Yeah. Well, where are you guys? You guys are in Toronto?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Oh, okay. So we're Calgary Flames. I cheer for the Calgary Flames. I don't cheer for the Oilers.
Man,
right?
Hey, that's good now.
But I don't mind the Toronto Maple Leafs either.
I say we're better, but
Well, you're original six.
Facts.
Yeah.
So hey, just a quick question is you said you're part of the Blackfoot Confederation. Is that different from the tribes that we would have here, or is it? Yeah.
Out there, you guys have a lot of Algonquin and Ojibwe,
yep.
And I think there's probably some Ojibwe Cree, and there's the Oka, Ganastaki, Six Nations. Mm-hmm. So they're all First Nation communities, and out here in Alberta, we have First Nation communities. But the way things are in Alberta is comprised of 3 treaty areas: Treaty 6, Treaty 7, and Treaty 8. And I know out in Ontario they do have treaties as well that were negotiated well before Western Canada. When colonization happened, it happened within Eastern Canada first, and then made its way over to the West. So I know that there are treaties out there as well. Treaty 1, Treaty 11, and there's other treaties out there. So I'm from Treaty 7. That's probably Red Deer and everything south, going down into the border and actually into the United States, into northern Montana. Yeah.
So it's a big territory there, huh?
Yeah, it is. Yeah. So, and the Blackfoot Confederacy consists of 4 tribes. There's the Kainai, the Siksika, and then the Blackfeets in Montana in the United States, and then the Piikani, which is my community.
And,
Yeah.
and I'm sure they're like all different languages, different.
No, we're all the same language. We're all the same. Yeah, the Blackfoots, we all have our own language, and then once you go out of our territory, there's other linguistics out here, like the Stoney Nakoda. They have their own language. The Cree, of course, and the Dene and Tsuut'ina, which is just outside of Calgary. So we each have our own different dialects, eh? But within the Blackfoot Confederacy, we all have our own the same language.
Okay.
Yeah.
You know, where I was introduced to I would even say the horrors of our Canadian history was I was in a nightclub and I was talking to a gentleman, and he was rather drunk, and I was like, yeah, whatever, you know, this guy's just talking. He came back the next day, and the stories that I heard were like something you would hear in like a horror movie, honestly. Like, it was not something that I even want to talk about. It was that bad. It was to a child. He was like 9 years old when stuff happened to him, and I was just like, why don't we ever hear about this stuff? Oh, and then he said, oh, well, the 60s sweep is something we just push aside as a society. And I was like, the 60s sweep? And then he went in a little bit more of the detail. Would you be able to just give us a brief background of this, what the 60s sweep was?
It's actually you're saying it inaccurate. It's actually the 60s scoop.
Oh, the 60s scoop. That's correct. That's
yeah. I think you were saying 60s sweep. No, it's not 60s sweep. It's 60s scoop, eh? Yeah. So, anyways, I guess just to give you, I'm sure that our viewers, as well as yourself, have heard of the residential school within the indigenous communities across Canada, which was very, very horrific in itself, eh? Yeah. You've heard of that, correct?
That was like when I was in like high school. I heard a little bit about that.
Yeah,
but, nobody really dived into it. I asked questions. Nobody really wanted to talk about it at all.
Yeah, well, the residential schools was a time in Canada's history where the indigenous people across Canada, as young children, were forcibly removed by the Indian agent, the Government of Canada, and removed from their families and their homes and their parents and their grandparents, and placed in a boarding school. And the boarding schools were primarily run by were administered by the Government of Canada, but they were farmed out to the organized religions across Canada, the Roman Catholics, the Protestants, and the Anglicans to facilitate an assimilation process in taking the Indian out of the child. So a lot of those kids in our indigenous communities across Canada were forcibly removed and put into these boarding homes, and they weren't allowed to go home. And they suffered a lot of atrocities, during that time, a lot of, physical abuse, sexual abuse, loss of culture, loss of identity. And as a result, we can call it cultural genocide. Canada is guilty of cultural genocide towards the indigenous people. I myself, I never did go to residential school. My grandparents and my parents, they went to residential school. And what had happened was probably in the 1960s and the 1970s, the residential schools was starting to come to a close. Mind you, there were still quite a few that were open, but the Government of Canada had to implement something else that could continue with the assimilation process. So in 1951, the Government of Canada, under the former Prime Minister John Diefenbaker, they amended the Indian Act in 1951 to offload the responsibility of child and family services to the provinces. And it was at that time where the provincial child welfare authorities across Canada and all of the territories and all of the provinces were directed by the provincial governments to go out and forcibly remove as many indigenous children in our communities across Canada, which was inclusive of the Métis, the First Nation, and the Inuit communities. And we were taken and removed from our communities, taken away from our parents, our grandparents, and we were put in non-Indigenous foster homes and adoptions. And that's basically where we grew up for the rest of our lives. And so,
this is a
yeah.
quick question here. When they were just taking everybody and they're saying, hey, was it that there was abuse going on at home? Like, hey, like here we have children's aid, and if the child is being abused or molested, then they take them? Or is it just like, hey, all outright, we're just taking
No, it was kind of a combination of I'm a victim of the 60s Scoop. I'm a survivor of the 60s Scoop. And what had happened is, when I was removed from my parents and my grandparents, what had happened is that my parents were just coming home from the residential school. And because of all the atrocities and all the trauma and everything that they had experienced in residential school, they didn't really have the skills to be effective parents.
Mm-hmm.
And and you can't blame them on that, because it all goes back to cultural genocide. So and the government of Canada wanted to continue that assimilation process of basically taking the Indian out of the child and assimilating us into mainstream Canadian culture. And so that's why they amended that Indian Act to give the provinces the authority to go in and physically forcibly remove us, and for the simple reason of trying to make the Indigenous children across Canada to make us white, so that we could, and everything like that. And it was very, very horrific. So when it really, really peaked in the 1960s, we can estimate that there was probably about 125,000 Indigenous children that were removed across Canada. And in the 1960s, when it really peaked, you could have gone into any of our communities, the First Nation, the Métis, and the Inuit communities across Canada, and you could drive through our communities and you wouldn't see you wouldn't see no children, because we were gone. We were, you drive by the school, you go through the playground, on the streets, and you would not see any kids because we were gone. And that's what happened to me and all of my siblings and my family and a big number of extended family in my community. We were part of that, eh?
See, that's unthinkable in a sense of like nowadays, just like, hey, rounding up all the children and just ship them off to, like, and not to like, we're going to give you a better life. It's literally like, we want to take your culture, your beliefs, your heritage, your history, everything who you were, and just take it away from you. Right? Like, in my opinion, you can correct me if I'm wrong, I think that's where we see a lot of pain instill into the community. Like you see unfortunately, people that are heavy in the alcohol, heavy into the drugs, and it's because of the pain and the trauma. It wasn't just like, hey, I'm going to be a drug addict today. No, this was back in the day. Like, this is what happened. And like, it's hurting people's head to this day. It's hurting people.
Yeah, it is. And you know what is, I can really attest to because you've really hit the nail on the head, because that's exactly what happened. Because of all that trauma and all that loss that we experienced, as we were aging and we were growing up, a lot of us succumbed to alcohol abuse, drug abuse, as a tool to mask all that trauma and all that hurt and all that pain, eh? And myself, being part of the 60s Scoop, I can honestly say that I lost a lot. That I still today, as a man, I don't have. And the biggest thing that I don't have today is the ability to talk my own language, which is Blackfoot. I cannot speak my own language, and to me, that's a huge, huge loss. Eh?
That's wow.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. But it was really horrific. You know, when I got apprehended and I got removed, you know, I come from a big family. My family, there's probably about 10 of us, you know,
Wow.
including my mom and dad. So I had 8 other siblings. And in the 1960s, we were all forcibly removed by Alberta Child Welfare. You know, the Alberta government under the direction of the Government of Canada. And I was born in 1964, and I was removed in 1965. So I was still quite small. I was just a baby. And my older sibling, my older sister, who is the oldest, she's 9 years older than me, and she has memories, vivid memories of what happened that day when child welfare came and drove up into our communities, and they came and coursed us with chocolate, you know, chocolate bars that they were in the vehicle, and we were just young kids.
Of course, chocolate.
And yeah, you know, every kid likes candy, right? You
100%.
know, and we were coursed with chocolate, you know, and so we went in and we got the candies, and next thing we were driven away. And that was the last time that we had ever seen our mom and dad
Well,
and
hold on.
our
They didn't even go up
grandparents.
to the house. They didn't nothing. Just like off the street, off the playground, wherever they saw you, they're taking.
Yeah, wherever they saw kids. Yeah, yeah, yeah. And
That,
we were taken, eh? And you know, and since that time, you know, we were taken to a children's shelter, you know, in the nearby city, in close proximity to the reserve.
mm,
And we were put in there, and next thing we were until there was non-indigenous families that came forward and made the decision that they were going to take on, you know, the responsibility of fostering and parenting some of our kids.
wow.
So I was a part of that, and so as an infant, right up until I aged out of child welfare, I was never allowed to come home once to my home community. I was never allowed to come home and see my mom and dad. I was never allowed to go visit my siblings, and I was bounced around from home to home. You know, it wasn't just one particular home that
Yeah.
I was in. I was bounced around from numerous homes all over southern Alberta. And in some of those homes, you know, some of those homes, they were okay, but some of them were really, really horrific, where I experienced a lot of mental abuse, you know, physical abuse, farm labor, you know, being put in a foster setting on a farm, and forced to go out and do chores that I could not do because I was just a little kid, you know. And
Wow.
you know, and there was also a lot of sexual abuse that happened, you
Imagine.
know, to me as a result of being in care. And the thing is that, you know, so I grew up living a life of fear, living a life of you know, not knowing who I was,
Mhm.
not knowing where I came from, not knowing, you know. And there was a time as an indigenous person, a First Nations person, you know, I was very, very ashamed of the color of my skin. You know, I looked at the color of my skin and I was dark, I was brown, I'm First Nation, and I would be ashamed of the color of my skin, and I didn't like who I was. And as you know, and I recalled probably when I was in about my 6th or 7th foster home, as a little 8-year-old, that was the first time where I contemplated committing suicide.
At 8.
Because yes, because you know what, that loss of identity, that culture, that language, that family, it was just overwhelming. And I remember, you know, being in the foster home, and you know, and all of us kids had to go to bed, and you know, and I would spend the whole night looking out the window in complete darkness and wondering who I was and where I was going, where I fit in, and having thoughts of I would much rather not be here, you know. And it was a very, 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 very sad time, eh?
Wow.
And you know, so been bounced around from home to home, one other thing that's really prevalent with 60 Scoop and that assimilation process is abandonment. We've had to live with abandonment, being taken away from our parents, in our communities and being put in a foreign environment that we're not used to, that's abandonment, and each time that I was removed from home to home, I suffered abandonment. That abandonment was there all over again, eh? And I don't wish that upon anybody to have to go through what I went through, as a young child, because it was very, very horrific. And the thing is, what is within the indigenous communities across Canada, this happened to over 100,000 of us across Canada. And growing up and being in that situation, I thought I was the only one. And that loneliness, eh? And let alone knowing when I grew up that it happened to numerous other people, numerous other indigenous people across Canada, and I also know that a lot of those children that were removed from the First Nations, the Inuit, and the Métis community, a lot of them were placed globally, outside of Canada.
Globally.
Yes, in the United States. I was very fortunate that I actually stayed within Canada, but there was a lot of us, we were removed and placed in the United States, in Europe, in Germany, in Great Britain, in London, Australia, New Zealand, Japan. And I'm going to share some really horrific stories with you. Is that when I in the 1980s, I was working I was working in the helping profession as an addictions counselor in the 1980s.
Mm-hmm.
And this one day, we had an Indigenous man that came into our office and was looking for support. And this Indigenous man was from one of the Blackfoot communities in and around Calgary. And he had just come to us and had gotten off the airplane at the Calgary International Airport. And he had flown in from Germany, because that's where he was removed as a young child, and he was put in an adoption setting in Germany, and that's where he grew up. And when he arrived in Canada, he wanted to come home and reconnect with his family and his community and his First Nation, and learn his language, but let alone, he couldn't even speak a word of Blackfoot, let alone English. He was very fluent in German, and that was the only thing that he could speak, eh? And as a result, he ended up taking his own life on the streets in Calgary because of that loss of identity, and he had lost his will to live, and he ended up killing himself on the streets in Calgary. So and today, we have a lot of our kids that were a part of that 60 Scoop that are about my age that have still not come home to Canada, to their Indigenous community, and they're still abroad in Germany, in Australia, in New Zealand, I talked to somebody else from my community who was placed in Finland, and it was just horrific, and so the thing is that the 60 Scoop really destroyed our communities. It really, really destroyed our communities. And like I said, I don't wish it upon anybody to have to go through what we had to experience, as part of the 60 Scoop.
Like I've done a little bit of research, and it showed that the highest rate of suicide is in the Indigenous community here in Canada. The highest rate of sexual assault is here in the community in Canada, is in the Indigenous community. It's just, when you say it destroyed your community, and it's not just dispersed the community, it destroyed the mentality, the people, the community as a whole, in every level of a comprehensive life.
Mm-hmm.
And it's sad to say, like, we're the best country in the world, and
Mm-hmm.
to some people it's pretty much hell, if you know, for lack of better words, because
Mm-hmm.
regardless of how great our opportunities are, if you see hell through your eyes, right? Like I
Mm-hmm.
was watching somebody the other day talking about Christians. We're always preaching about hell. Don't go to hell. Don't go to hell. But he's like, I live in hell every day of my life.
Right.
What are you talking to me about? And
Mm-hmm.
when he said that, I was just like, wow. Like
Mm-hmm.
just because we walk around and we pick up jobs and we go to school, all this stuff, it doesn't change or negate what happened to us. It
Mm-hmm.
it doesn't like I was 27. I was molested when I was 4 years old. When I was 27, the guy threw me inside of a closet. Right.
Mm-hmm.
From 4 years old to 27, I was terrified of closets. Like
Mm-hmm.
petrified. Like all my clothes would be outside, would be in a basket, in something, but I won't go in a closet until I was 27.
Yeah.
I'm 31 now, so it's just a couple years ago. So going through life, people were like, "Oh, this guy's normal. Hey, this is the normal thing." Bro, I'm terrified of closets,
Mm-hmm.
and people don't get that. You go through different things, and it impacts you yesterday, today, tomorrow, the next day, because it's just it. You can't take away our memories. You know what I mean? You can't take away
Mm-hmm.
what happened. And I was very when I was watching part of your documentary, I seen that when you did go back,
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah.
when you did go back, it wasn't like, oh, I'm home. It was more emotional. It was more. Would you be able to
Mm-hmm.
speak a little bit about that?
Yeah, when I finally aged out of child welfare before just before I turned 18, I was there was the foster parents and the child welfare authority made the decision that it was probably in my best interest that I actually go home to my own community. Um, Having said that, not ever being there ever,
Changes
you
things.
know, except when I was taken as a baby. And when I did go home to my community, you know, I experienced culture shock, you know, like you could not imagine, because when I went home to my own community, I saw a lot of things in my own community that I had never been exposed to in my life. And you know I saw a lot of alcoholism, a lot of drug addiction, you know, a lot of domestic violence, you know, and housing conditions that were quite deplorable. And this is what I saw. And when I went home, um, I really didn't feel like I wanted to be there. And you know, going home, you know, it should be a place of excitement and you know, because you're going home. But for me, it wasn't. It was scary. I was very, very scared. And to top it off, you know, I used to get teased a lot in my own community by my own community members, being called an apple. You know, I was red on the outside but white on the inside.
Oh, wow.
You know, and you know, so that rejection, you know, it just fueled things and it made things worse. So what I did is I started to drink quite a bit. I drank very, very heavily, and I became quite a hard drinker. And you know, and I drank and it got into the drugs, you know, probably for a good 15, 20 years to mask all that rejection and all that abandonment and all that abuse and all that trauma. And that was my coping mechanism. And I ended up on the streets in Vancouver on downtown East Side. And I don't know if you've ever been to Vancouver. You've
No,
been to downtown East Side. You know, that's where hell is. You know, I'm sure you've heard stories about it. You've seen documentaries on TV.
of course.
Downtown Vancouver East Side, East Hastings,
It's not
and
good.
it is the worst place that you can end up. And they say that within our First Nation communities, that if any of our members actually end up going to Vancouver and that end up on the streets on the downtown East Side, they're probably not coming home. They're only coming home in a casket, you know, in a box, eh? And so that's where I ended up. I ended up on the streets in Vancouver. I ended up, you know, a drug addict. I ended up, drinking and living on the streets and being homeless and losing my kids because I had become a parent by that time. I lost my kids, and my kids were removed by BC Child Welfare, and they were put into a white foster home. And all of a sudden, I realized one day when the child welfare worker came and told me that if I didn't do something about my drinking, I was going to lose my kids permanently, and I was never going to see them. The light bulb went on, and I kind of thought to myself, you know what? The cycle was repeating itself. What had happened to me was now happening to my kids. So as a result, I went out there and I drank my sorrows, through alcohol and drugs, and I suffered a drug overdose, on heroin and cocaine, and I ended up in the hospital in Vancouver. And when I opened my eyes, I was very, very angry when I opened my eyes, because at that point in my life, I would have rather have been dead, but for whatever reason, the Creator gave me the opportunity to kind of gave me another chance. And so what happened is I made the decision that I was going to do something about my life, and that was in 1994. And with the help of some very good support workers, there was a referral that was made for me to go to a treatment center, and that's where I went. And I went and I stayed there for probably about a good month and a half. And I started to get in touch with all that trauma and everything that I was bottling up in my life to start to deal with it. And then when I came out of treatment center, I went to a recovery home in Vancouver, and I stayed there for probably about a year, and got some good sobriety under my belt. And I started to get more access to my kids, and through the court process, I had to go through a very nasty divorce, with the woman that I was with at that time, the mother of my kids. And she was still out there doing her thing on the streets on Vancouver East Side. And so I actually applied for custody of my two daughters. And at that time, they were probably, I think, about 4 and 6. And I was awarded sole custody, and I became a single father, raising 2 little girls in Vancouver, staying sober, So, but it was hard. It was really, really hard. And, and so I stayed out there in Vancouver for about 10 years, and eventually I came home, and there was just a lot of amazing things that happened, when I came home, that gives this story a lot of hope.
I just want to go back a little bit. Is when you were saying you felt the abandonment in the youth just because of being taken away, being changed at different homes. How did that go with when you got your children back and being able to? Was there ever like I don't know how to show that kind of love. Like I didn't have that love when I was growing up, because I was just through this person and that person? Or was it just unconditional, like, I'm going to give you everything I didn't get?
You know what? It was really, really hard for me, because at that time, as a young child, I never experienced that nurturing, from a mother, and I think if we kind of look at families today, they say that the most important time in a person's life is those first 6 months from when they were born, and that's that nurturing that they get from their mother, and I never had that. I never had that. And so when I did get custody of my two oldest daughters, it was really, really hard. And I really had to go for a lot of therapy and a lot of counseling to help me to become a better person, because that's what I really wanted to do. I really wanted to become a better person. And you know what? It's really interesting, because a couple of days ago, I was actually cleaning my house, getting it ready for Christmas, and making the area good for the Christmas tree and all the decorations to go up. And I looked under my bed because I hadn't cleaned under there for quite some time. And I pulled out, and I reached under there, and I pulled it out, and I pulled out a yellow duotang with papers in there. And you know what it was? It was a journal that I had done in 1994 when I was sobering up and getting my life together and going through that whole notion of, going to a treatment center, going to a recovery home, going through a messy divorce, getting access to my kids, struggling with all the feelings and the abuse that were coming up, and becoming a single parent and raising two little daughters in Vancouver. And I came across it and I started to open it up and I started to read it. And it was a journal that I did every single day from 1994, 1995, 1996. For 3 years, I wrote in a journal and I had forgotten that I had that. Wow. And I came across it. And I told my wife, I gave it to her and I said, you know what? I can't believe that, that I still have this. And I was reading through, and it's a very, very powerful, and in that journal, it talks about the struggles that I had to go through, and trying to get my life together, because it didn't come easy. It was hard. And you know what, the thing is, they talk about PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. I don't know if you're aware of it, PTSD. And the thing is that when they talk about PTSD, it's often referred to those men and women that have gone in combat overseas and have fought in the in the wars, and they come back and they're traumatized because of all the death that they were exposed to or that they had to do themselves. And when you see someone, when someone goes through something like that, it's obvious that they're going to come home and they're going to be traumatized. So they label it PTSD. And the thing is that with Indigenous people, with what we had to go through in our lives, from colonization, the signing of treaties, the Indian residential school, the Sixties Scoop, the missing and murdered Indigenous women in Canada, and the forced sterilization of our women in the hospitals, that's all trauma. So Indigenous people, a lot of us, were walking around with PTSD. And I can admit that I suffer that today. I suffer with that post-traumatic stress disorder, and I'm not going to sit here and say that life is not, hunky-dory. As a 56-year-old man, I still struggle every single day, waking up, trying to live each day, one day at a time, on good terms, because all of that trauma and all that oppression and all that abuse, it's still there. And that abandonment, and it's tough. It's tough. So the Indigenous people, because of what has happened to us, we have PTSD. Just like those guys that have gone into combat,
I was speaking to, again, unfortunately, a lot of my interactions with and this particular Indigenous gentleman happened to be at a bar, but we actually got to talk, and it was a great conversation that we had. And he was explaining to me, and I asked him a question. I was like, hey, I was a bouncer, so I got into a couple scraps here and there, and I was like, the hardest people I've ever fought were Indigenous. Like, it was hard. And I was like, bro, what? Why? Like, why? What's up? And he's like, we're a warrior generation. We are warriors. I'm like, what are you talking about? They explained to me the significance of the long hair. He explained to me the significance of the dancing and the songs and like, stuff like that. And I was just like, he's like, inside of us, we're just fighters, that you can't hold us down, that you can't press us down. And when you find an Indigenous individual, male or female, that found themselves, that knows who they are, that has come to grips with their past, their present, and the potential future, it's more than I'm fighting you. It's I'm fighting your mother, I'm fighting your grandparents, I'm fighting your ancestors, because that's living with inside of you every single day. And it was such a interesting perspective, because he was explaining, he's like, he went through the 60s Scoop, and he never met his mom or his dad, but he's like, through going back to where he came from, he got reunited with his ancestors, and going through the whole process. And I was just like, there's more to this individual than this individual. It's the identity. It's
Mm-hmm.
who I am. And I think that when you were saying that, when they're making us to be white, I think that's such a powerful thing, because who you are is who you were created to be. And the power that there is in you is phenomenal. And when somebody tries to change that, hamper that, dissolve that in some instances, it's pretty traumatizing to anybody.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's just it's wild how.
Yeah, yeah. But if I can, I want to share with you a little bit about who I am today and the
Please,
man
please.
that I've become, despite having to face the atrocities that I have had to face in my life. And like I said, it hasn't all been a bed full of roses. It's been tough. It's been really, really tough. But one of the things that happened in when I was in Vancouver, after I had achieved a little bit of sobriety, I continued to live in Vancouver, and I started to uh, uh, dabble in getting jobs here and there. And it was not long before that, during that time, that I started to notice something about me, that I had the ability to be a leader.
Mm.
I had the ability to be a leader. I had the skills to be a leader, and I really created a lot of opportunities. When I was in Vancouver, working in the indigenous community in BC. As the tribal administrator, the band manager, serving on a lot of boards and committees, in the indigenous community. And I really excelled and established a good career in BC. And I guess when and one good thing that happened when I was in BC, because of a lot of the things that I did, I was recognized by the government of BC with an appointment to one of the largest health authorities in BC as a governor. And I served out public office for 4 years as a governor to the South Fraser Health Region. But what had happened was, BC wasn't my home. It wasn't my home province. It wasn't my community. So what I did is, I started. By this time I had built a connection to my community. Even though that was hard,
Mm.
I forced myself to live in my own community. I forced myself to live with my late father. For probably about a good 5 to 10 years in my own community.
Wow.
And so the people started to get to know who I was, and I started to get to know who my relatives were and my relations. So I had developed a presence in my community, even though I
Beautiful.
was living in BC. So I kind of told myself that, what, when I was in BC, I could only take my career so far. And I knew that if I wanted to take it any further, that I needed to come home, and that was
Mm.
back to Alberta. So I started looking for good working opportunities in Alberta, and I got a job with the First Nation government as the tribal administrator. And I came home, and I moved home, and I started to go down to my community and go to the band meetings, go to the elders gatherings, go to the powwows, so to create a presence. And uh, at some point we had general elections in my community, and I ran for chief and council, as an elected leader. And through the campaign, I worked hard, and I was going out and campaigning. And on election day, when people had cast their ballots, my name was in there. And when we were counting the ballots, every other ballot that was coming out of there was Adam North Peigan, Adam North Peigan, Adam North Peigan. And in the early morning, when the election was completed, I couldn't believe that I had received a popular vote, and I was elected to leadership in my own community as a member of chief and council. And I was just so overwhelmed with so much emotion because this was a community that I was taken away from. This was a community that ridiculed me and called me an apple and told me that I was too white. This was a community where I was ashamed of the color of my skin. And to come home and to bestow the honor of my own community to be given the popular vote and given that honor to lead them as an elected leader. You know, it was amazing for a 60 Scoop survivor to come home and be able to do that. And I served in leadership in my community as a member of chief and council, you know, for quite a while, you know, and you know, and people looked at me as a leader, eh? And but you know how politics are, eh? One day you're there, one day you're not, right? Look what's happening right now with Donald Trump and Joe Biden. You know what I mean? Politics is nasty, eh?
100%.
Yeah. So there was a time when you know I decided that you know I guess my community told me that I needed to take a rest, and I was voted out of council. You know, after a few terms in leadership, but the experience was good. So I left, you know, I left my community and I moved up to Edmonton and I started to get involved in the indigenous urban community. And one thing that was happening was the residential school survivors were getting their acknowledgement. They got an apology from the former Prime Minister of Canada for the abuses that they suffered. They were compensated. You know, they got financial compensation for what they had to endure. You know, through residential school. There was the Prime Minister of Canada put together a Truth and Reconciliation Commission. You know, and appointed 3 Indigenous commissioners to oversee that. And they traveled across Canada and had, you know, gatherings of numerous residential school survivors across Canada. They were in Toronto. They were in your backyard too. They went all over the big cities, eh? And the Truth and Reconciliation Commission tabled their final report, and they came up with 94 calls of action that were put back to the Prime Minister of Canada to improve the lives of the Indigenous people in Canada. So when all this was going on, you know, I was really happy for the residential school survivors that they were getting their acknowledgement because they deserved it. But at the same time, myself not being part of the residential school, I thought to myself, you know, what about us? What about what happened to me? You know, I'm a 60 Scoop. I suffered just as much, you know, trauma as the residential school survivors, even maybe worse. And what about me? And what about the other survivors? And in June of 2015, I was watching CBC National News, and I was at home, and I turned it on. And you know what I saw on TV? CBC National News, Global National, was the former premier in the province of Manitoba, the Honorable Greg Selinger. He rose up in the Manitoba legislature and he issued an official apology to all of the 60 Scoop survivors in the province of Manitoba. And I sat home and I was in Edmonton and I watched it. And you know what? I kind of thought to myself, you know what? If Manitoba can do that, then why not Alberta? So what I did is that very same day, you know, after a good cry, you know, watching that apology, you know, I started writing a lot of letters to the Alberta government, to the premier, talking about 60 Scoop, talking about reconciliation, talking about an apology. And, you know, and I went on all the media outlets in Alberta and started talking about 60 Scoop, because I knew that there was thousands and thousands of us that were affected by that in Alberta. And you know what is, you know, when you deal with government, sometimes things happen very slow, like a turtle, you know, very, very slow. And I remember, you know, getting a lot of lip service back from the Alberta government. You know, thank you, Mr. North Peigan, for your letter, you know, and we're sorry that you had to experience all that trauma in your life, but when the government is ready to look at 60 Scoop, we'll give you a call, you know. And I took that as lip service, eh? 100%. And it got to the point where I was writing letters every single day to the Government of Alberta about 60 Scoop. And I still have a stack in my file in my office of all those letters that I wrote because I was very passionate about it. And I believed that something needed to be done for the 60 Scoop survivors. And I didn't relent, and I didn't get frustrated. And I stayed focused, and I was very determined that reconciliation needed to happen for 60 Scoop survivors. And I continued to put the pressure on the Alberta government. And so what I did is, when I started to get tired of the lip service, I went to the official opposition in the Alberta government, and I went and I shared my story with them. And they told me that they were going to raise the issue of 60 Scoop in the Alberta legislature, and they were going to put it to the Premier and the Minister of Indigenous Relations that, 60 Scoop survivors are here in Alberta. They're looking for an apology. When, Madam Premier, are you going to apologize to them? And they invited us to sit up in the gallery of the Alberta legislature when all this took place. So the thing is that, the system only reacts when the system is feeling pressured. And that day, the government of Alberta felt the pressure because we strategically did it on the day that the government of Alberta was releasing the provincial budget. We did that very strategically because we knew that we were guaranteed that the Premier and all of Cabinet and all the MLAs were going to be in the House, but we were also guaranteed that there was also going to be a lot of media attention, because when a provincial government releases, the budget, it's big news. And so we were going to piggyback on that and utilize all the media we could. And that's when that was the day that it happened. And it was on that day where the Premier stood up and committed that she was going to do something about it. And so that day when I went home, and I went home from the Alberta legislature, and I came home within 20 minutes when I walked into my house, my phone rang. It was the Minister of Indigenous Relations, and he called me. Wow. And he told me, he apologized to me and said that, I'm sorry I didn't take your letter seriously. I apologize, and let's sit down and talk. And I was invited to a meeting with him and the Minister of Children's Services and with a group of 60 Scoop survivors. And we went and met with them, and we shared our heartfelt, gut-wrenching stories. And we started to talk about, reconciliation and apology, and how were we going to do that? What was the plan? So what we did is we developed an engagement plan where we would go out and we would engage as many 60 Scoop survivors in the province of Alberta as possible, with the goal in mind that at the end of the day, it was going to result in an apology. And we wanted to go out and listen to as many 60 Scoop survivors and listen to their stories and listen to, when someone says, I'm sorry, what does that mean to you? Yeah. What does an apology look like? We wanted to hear that from the survivors. And the ministers traveled with us, and they sat in those sharing circles, and they witnessed and they heard those horror stories about what had happened to us. And we traveled all over the province of Alberta, and we had those engagement sessions. And at the end of the day, we probably successfully engaged well over 2,060 Scoop survivors in Alberta alone, in our travels. And we rolled up all the data, and we identified common themes, and we put that into an apology. And we worked with the Alberta government in crafting the wording of an apology. And it all resulted on a very historic day in the province of Alberta on May 28, 2018, when the government of Alberta stood up and issued an official apology to the 60 Scoop survivors in Alberta. And it was a very, very powerful day. And on that day, I remember that there were 60 Scoop survivors that came to Edmonton that day to bear witness to that historic apology. And there was probably about 5,000 survivors that came to Edmonton that day. And we all came to the Alberta legislature to hear the Premier say, I'm sorry. I'm sorry for the atrocities. I'm sorry that the 60 Scoop happened. I'm sorry that it was an assault on the Indigenous people in the province of Alberta. And it was a very, very emotional day, for myself. And because the thing is that, when something happens, sometimes it only takes one person And that's what happened. Is it only took one person to begin that whole process, and we created a community, and we were able to put pressure on a big government system to be able to get an apology, and it happened. And I'll never forget that day. And after the apology, we had drums. We had drummers there that danced, that sang an honor song for the 60 Scoop survivors, and we had a grand entry procession that came out of the front doors of the Alberta legislature onto the front steps of the Alberta legislature. And when we came through those doors, we were met with a thundering applause of probably about 4,000 survivors.
Wow.
That were huddled, gathered on the front steps of the Alberta legislature. And I was wearing my my ceremonial headdress that I had received through transfer, because of my leadership in chief and council, my own community. And I had the responsibility to go out and speak to all the survivors that were gathered on the front steps of the Alberta legislature to acknowledge the apology that the Alberta government had just given. And it was such an emotional day, and so when I think back to the things that I have achieved in my life, I've achieved a lot, but that particular day of May 28th, 2018 was probably one of the greatest things that I have ever had to experience in my life, and so there is a lot of hope out there, but you have to persevere. You have to believe in yourself. You have to be passionate, to be able to carry that day. So post apology, we're continuing to still do a lot of work with creating awareness, with mainstream Canadians on the atrocities of 60 Scoop, because it's part of our history. It's part of the history of the indigenous people in Canada. Just like residential school, just like signing of treaties, just like colonization, it's part of our history. And Canadians need to understand that.
100%, 100%. And that's a remarkable story of somebody that was taken away from, and not knowing anything, to, like you said, not even knowing your language, be able to speak language, to somebody that came back on your own, to not even just coming back, but to being cast out from the community, ostracized from your actual community, to say, hey, you're an apple, you're somebody that's not us, you're not part of us. You're like, I am. But then you went back and you went through, again, some tough times, some rough times, to say, what, I'm not done here. I'm gonna go back, I'm gonna make my community better. And then you went back to be a leader of that community. And that, to then, being ousted, if you will, in a particular setting, saying, what, I'm not done yet.
No.
I'm going to go back. I'm going to still make my community better. And having that real passion to say, what, this is what happened to me. This is what happened to my friends. This is what happened to my family. This is what happened to my community. And I'm not going to rest. I'm not going to be quiet. I'm not going to go silently into the night. You're not going to just, push me off the side with a bottle. I'm going to stand here and I'm going to fight for what I believe is right. And that's not just what you did before. That's clearly what you've designed and dedicated your life to. And wow, sir, that's amazing.
Yeah, it's an amazing story, and it gives what, and I guess the thing is that, when you and I started to talk about doing something like this, and you wanted to create hope, and I think the story that I've shared today, it does give a lot of hope,
100%.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of people in the indigenous community, the Black community, the just every community really out there. We've all been through something. We've all been through a tragedy. If it was home with their family being abused, it would be with a spouse, regardless what it is. I believe your story doesn't just hit, of course, directly to the indigenous community, but yet of a father that lost his children, that, was going through, pain with inside of you, drugs and alcohol abuse and poisoning yourself, to say, hey, you know what? I'm going to make a change in my life.
Mm-hmm.
And it wasn't a day. It wasn't, today I'm going to make a change and that's it. No. It was that day, the next day, the next day. It's a constant thing that we can't give up the fight, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
I remember you said earlier that at 8 years old, you thought of committing suicide. But
Mm-hmm.
I think you said something distinctly. You said that was my first thought. And what the hard part and the sad part about that is that means it wasn't the only one.
Mm-hmm.
That wasn't, oh, I thought it once and I brushed it on my head. No. It was a reoccurring thing because the pain didn't go away. And I hope and I pray that through your works today, helping other people, that pain is slowly subsiding, and that you being able to reach out from your heart and through your experiences to touch other people's lives is dimming that pain and subsiding it a bit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And you know what, I want to encourage the viewers, that if you want a little bit more information, that you go out and you I challenge you, Google my name, Adam North Peigan. Google my name, and I encourage you to watch some documentaries, very, very well done documentaries that were done, on my journey and the trials and tribulations and where I've come through, and so there was a good one through CBC Historica Canada,
Mm-hmm.
as well as Sixties Scoop More Than Sorry, and those are just
That's
two
the one I
pieces,
watched.
and they're
Wow.
very, very, they're very powerful pieces of work,
Yeah.
So. But today, you know what? I like to think that life is still tough today, but at the same time, I'm leading a good life today. I'm happily married, raising a granddaughter, raising a handicapped son. I have two of my daughters that are in university in Vancouver at
Wow.
UBC,
Beautiful.
and you know what? I'm continuing to do work in our community, in the indigenous community. And most recently, I was elected as the national board president for the Legacy of Hope Foundation, so it'll give me an opportunity to continue to do my work at a more national level that expands outside the borders of Alberta, so I'm looking forward to continuing to move mountains, because nobody can tell me that you can't move mountains, because I know that they can, because I've done that. Mountains can be moved.
Yes. 100% with the right passion. And obviously, sir, you definitely have that. You definitely have that, sir. So, well, sir, I have two questions. One, what would be one thing that you would tell somebody that's going through a storm, going through a trial right now in their life? What would you tell them to give them a little bit of hope, obviously, outside of that amazing story you have?
Probably I would tell them that, is even though things look bleak, at this point in time, whatever it is you're going through, addictions, drug abuse, um, there's hope. There's hope, even though we may not be able to see it, but there's hope. And reach out and talk to someone. Reach out and there's a lot of good people in the world, and there's a lot of good resources in the world. And don't be afraid to reach out for help. A lot of people, they say that that's a sign of weakness. I don't see it as a sign of weakness. I see it as a strength, because you're admitting that you need help and you have the strength to be able to go out there and actually reach out for help. So I see it more as a strength. To me, it's not a weakness.
So I completely agree with you. And the second one, and the last one, sir, would you be able to say your name and your name and then saying you're a victor?
My name is Adam North Peigan, and I'm a victor.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Thank you so
Thank you.
much. Thank you so
All
much.
right.
And that was
Thank
a
you.
powerful story. And when I watched those documentaries that you sent me, for the holies, I was like, wow, yeah, we got to sit down, because being able to go through something is one thing, but letting other people say, hey, you know what, I'm not alone. Like you said, like, you still continuously go out and push forward that other people can get help and open up laneways for that to happen. And man, that was amazing. That was
Yeah.
amazing.
Well, thank you for your time today, and I thank you for reaching out, and I hope that this reaches people out there that really need to know that there is hope out there. Thank you.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Hey, thank you for your time as well. Have a good one.
All right. Thank you.